I am feeling quite well, and although this is a morning record, I'm feeling wonderful.
Can't afford to not record.
You can't afford it to
Well,
not record it.
let me help wake you up. Good morning. You are listening to the DNB program live from AWS 1 in the cloud. That's DNB, not Don and Bradstreet, not Dave and Buster's, Don and Brederick. I am your host, Don DeGare, and I'm here with my co-host, the indefatigable Brederick McDonald.
Thank you, Don. Brederick McDonald here. And with that beautiful intro, we're just going to jump right into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen, okay? Can you all share my screen here? Can you see my screen?
Screen is visible, and for those that cannot see the screen, it is an image of a young, very attractive woman who seems like she is going to sell something. And this is kind of in the form of like a vertical screen, like you're just about to watch a TikTok, and there's text overlaid on the message that says "message of love," and she's wearing a name tag. I can't see what it says. There's also it says "sponsored" in the lower left corner and "skip" in the right corner. This is a classic vertical scroll video screenshot. Did I get it right?
You nailed it, and I will tell you right now, there's no need to be able to read the name tag. Anyone who's been, I don't know, basically anywhere in the world over the last several years, this is a Mormon missionary, or as they like to refer to themselves now, the Church of Latter-day Saints. That's like a whole PC move, you can tell right there. But this is not about ripping about the Mormon Church. This is more just a broader topic of what is going on. Advertising and business and marketing have completely dominated every aspect of American culture at this point. So back up, and I'll give you the backstory to this. So on my normal YouTube, I'm one of those snobs that pays for premium. I just love it. I hate ads. I cannot do the ads. But on our channel's YouTube, we do not have premium. So when I go to upload our videos or do work on the channel, I get advertisements sometimes. And there was a video they recommended, so I clicked on the ad on the video, and all of a sudden I was like, "Oh, what's going on?" And this girl next door, hot woman, if you will, if I can throw that term back out there, just pops up on my screen, and I'm like, "Oh wow, like okay, what's going on here?" And it's like, "Are you lonely?" Because in the advert, she's talking to you, and she's like, "Are you lonely? Do you have no purpose in life?" And I'm kind of like, well, no, I'm not lonely, and I do have purpose in life, but I know people who are lonely and don't have purpose, and I've been there before. And where's this going? She's like, Jesus Christ loves you, and we want you to come hang out at the Church of Latter-day Saints with, girls like me. And you're like, wow, you're pretty cute. I would love to go hang out with you at some church group. So I was a little taken aback by this because I don't know if Jesus would approve of this ad, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And I was a little perplexed.
Okay. Advertising. This is kind of wild. I see what you're saying. Like the churches shouldn't advertise, and they shouldn't advertise in a way that targets sad, lonely people, especially sad, lonely men on the internet, of which there are many. However, I mean, so you say Jesus wouldn't approve. Don't you think Jesus did a decent amount of advertising? Granted, advertising was different 2,000 years ago. But what I'm trying to say is this anything different, or is this just I won't say regression to the norm, but same old, right? Jesus goes on tour. He's like, I'm going to impress people. I'm going to turn water into wine. I'm going to need to make food. I'm going to give big speeches. Everyone knows who I am. I get so hot that they got to take me down.
Okay. Honestly, I think I'm having a hard time putting my finger on exactly what makes me uncomfortable about this, because everything that you just said actually makes sense. And I actually don't mind them targeting young, lonely men on the internet. In fact, I think it's probably a good move. Young, lonely men on the internet are a very dangerous group of people traditionally, okay? As soon as the pornography and the weed and the online gambling kind of burn out of their systems, they tend to do things that are physically violent in the world, just historically. So I'm very comfortable with that. I guess I just feel like this is church softcore porn. That's what I think this is, okay? And I know I just came up with that term, but this is like this has got all the signals of just like I'm actually going at this like we've got this woman in front of you, and it's kind of like a degrading to the sex sells thing. I think we're
they're
arriving,
advertising God with sex appeal.
Yes,
is what makes you feel uncomfortable.
I think we're arriving at what makes me feel uncomfortable in this picture. Maybe I'm wrong.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
I will say, if you are advertising anything, it's been well established that putting a little sex appeal in it will increase the the conversion, if you will, of customers.
I'm even pro sex appeal. I am. Like, if you're selling me a Bugatti, yeah, put a girl in a bikini on there. I'm very comfortable with that.
Right. Well, so the Mormons are famous for their missionary effectiveness, right? I mean, they run maybe the most. I know many Christian groups, and for the context for the audience, Don is a political atheist, but an appreciator of religions.
Of course.
The Mormons, many groups have some kind of missionary orientation. They have proselytization as part of the faith. They're like, okay, you're part of our religion now, or you're part of our group. You need to go convert more people. This is very common in certain like American Protestant groups, but the Mormons have been doing it since day one. And I believe before they were kicked out of Massachusetts, they recruited a lot of people from England specifically. They sent people back over to England. They recruited a ton of people from the Midlands, maybe from like the Cornwall area. I don't know. They brought a ton of English people over pre you need to leave Connecticut era, and they continued that missionary orientation where now, like, to be part of the Mormon church, you need to go on a mission globally somewhere for 2 years.
Yes.
Right.
It's a huge part of their culture. The Mormons that I know, it's a huge part of their culture. Many of them end up like meeting their spouse around that time, and they like get locked in. Yeah.
So if you were to talk to the person buying ad space at LD, at the Church of Latter-day Saints, I bet they don't see anything wrong with this, right? Like what you said, they'd be like, why do you see sex appeal here? We just see a good Mormon, right?
Right.
I would guess they don't see what you are seeing, but maybe subconsciously they do. Then again, it may be conscious. I don't know. They're good salespeople, right? And good salespeople, they have strategies that are proven to work.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know. I don't know what they would think, but maybe they're not even Mormons who are coming up with this. They could have some external consultancies that are experts on social media advertising. But I'm just saying, just as a dude, this has got all the signals of like, we're targeting you. Like, I don't care what you say. Like, this is because if you're susceptible to this ad, if this sounds good to you, like, this is your kind of girl. Like, I will tell you right now, I do go to church. I have gone to church. And it's like a dream. Everybody wants to meet an awesome girl at church. That's like a thing. Okay. So I think that's kind of what they're like playing into here. And I guess that's where I'm just like, is that what they're actually advertising? I don't know. It's coded. It's weird. I actually think that a lot of these churches I'm going to pivot it slightly because I even think if that were the angle, I might even feel comfortable with this. But I think there are a lot of these kind of modern day churches now. The Mormons are definitely in this group. This whole like American Protestantism, non-denominationalism in this group. It's really that church is a business. And as soon as you get there, they're going to be talking about tithing. If God really loves you, if you really love God, you're going to start putting a little more cash in the plate. And so I actually would be interested not in the conversation of moralizing around this post, but I want to know how they're calculating ROI on their ad spend. That is the conversation that I actually want to have with these folks, because that conversation is definitely happening within their ranks. These ads are not cheap, man.
What's the conversion rate? I know I made that joke earlier, but it's a good one.
Oh, oh my goodness. Did you really? I didn't even catch it. I love that joke.
Yeah. No, this stuff can be very cynical, where you start out being like, we're going to bring people into the faith, whichever faith it may be, and you end with kind of a I don't know what the right word, boiler room, or like a Wolf of Wall Street sales approach. You got to hard sell them. They just said no.
Exactly. Well, and I think that's a big part of why these American churches are kind of falling apart. You know, why are church attendance dropping? It's because a lot of these people that really do identify that way, that have bought into it, instead of them just like doubling down on the actual fundamentals, all these young pastors, I used to have this term for them. I called them coffee shop pastors. It's like, because they just like, you know, they had a God spoke to them, Don. Now they happened to be at a coffee shop, but they were like deep in the scriptures, and they were like, you know, really praying it out. They have no context of the scriptures. They've never written any kind of serious like commentaries. They just like read all the old Christianese ones, but then they're like, God's telling me to do XYZ. I should start a church. And they're always like these dubious people. I mean, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but they are, man. And they're just like, and then they're all making 300, 400 grand a year. They live in the nicest part of town. They're the nicest dressed guy at the church service. And you're like, wait, what's going on here?
They make $400K?
Dude, a lot of these pastors make buku bucks, man. Buku bucks.
Yeah, I know there are a few rich ones, but I guess I didn't think about the fact that the middle of the bell curve of your average American pastor would be raking in six figures.
Oh, dude. Yeah. Really? I mean, imagine this. If you're a guy who's, we could just back of the envelope this. Let's say you got 200 families at your church, okay? That average family is making 100 grand, right? Mm-hmm. And a rule of thumb in Christianity is 10% donations pre-tax. So let's do the math on that. 10% of that is 10K times 200, right? That's 2 million, right?
And then can you pay yourself
$2 million
tax free? Like, do you pay
no,
income
they have
tax
to pay. They have to pay income tax, but they pay often. They'll have like a living stipend. They'll have perks. They'll have all these different things. Clergy,
and then the church can own your Lambo. Like, this is the church's
I think
Lambo.
There's a lot of that, yeah. But clergy can own or clergy can opt out of Social Security. That's true. But I guess what I'm saying is there's a lot of money to be made in these types of situations. The Mormon Church are famous for this. They're extremely well leveraged when it comes to real estate. This is very famous. Everyone knows this if you want to look it up. It's not a dig. I'm just telling you this is just a fact.
No, the Mormons got money.
They got money. A lot of these churches have huge resources at their disposal. And I guess I'm just saying, like, something has, as I'm getting older, has really struck me wrong on this whole thing. And that's, I guess, where I'm saying, I don't think Jesus would approve of you making, if you're in like the upper 10 percentile of the income at your church and you're the leader, something's wrong, man. Something's wrong.
He did flip the money tables. I don't think Jesus was okay. What I said earlier about Jesus being into advertising, I think that may have been a little misleading because Jesus wasn't collecting. He wasn't earning major ad revenue, posting videos on YouTube. He wasn't getting tithes from his followers, and then he wasn't offshoring that money into like he's like, oh, I got all these Roman denarii. I'm gonna offshore them into an account in, I don't know, Capri. He didn't do that, right? I think he went back to heaven, I guess, however you want to say it, without large sums of money, whereas some of these other folks couldn't necessarily say the same.
Yeah. Well, the reason I'm bringing this one up is, one, it just kind of struck me as odd, but I think actually, and you obviously disagree with me on this, I think broadly, but I think that like religion in general is one of the only few things that's going to kind of save us as a society because there's kind of some more fundamental truths there. And I think by confusing and muddying the waters with like we just got to get paid too, I think this is actually a very dangerous way because people are not stupid, and once they kind of get there, they understand maybe that your religious group is actually a little bit more about, the bottom line and that kind of thing. And, it's more about like us running this church and this social group and that kind of thing. I think you're going to have some problems.
Do you think churches should lose their nonprofit status in the United States?
I think it depends on what we're talking about. I would not start with churches, but nonprofit definitely needs to be revisited in the United States. The healthcare system should lose their nonprofit status before churches. But I mean, I think there should be some re-examining of the nonprofit status when it comes to these kind of things. I mean, there's a very famous story, and I don't know all the details about how the Church of Scientology got their nonprofit status. It's like a whole like back and forth story, and with the IRS, and there was like big federal lawsuits, and they ended up winning. And
I think what they did is they sued individual members of the IRS in a targeted manner to harass them until they were granted nonprofit status.
Is that the story?
Yeah. Germany famously looked at them and they're like, you're not a church, you're a business, and wouldn't give them any nonprofit status. So
that's where, there's supposed to be this kind of sacrosanct area. And this is kind of like just getting back to that idea of what are we talking about here? And there's like a spirit behind the law that, if you actually just like break it down, like, okay, you're the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster. Like, I know that's like another classic one, right? That people talk about. Like, okay, that's not actually a church group, but like they'll go through the hoops and this, that, and the other, and then they're able to take advantage of the tax system. And this is where you were supposed to have judges. And this is where a good judge is supposed to look at it and be like, hey, I see what you're doing here. Yeah, we're not doing that. Good luck, guys. And then just dismiss the case. But now they're like, well, technically speaking, I looked at the law, and it's like, you're not a judge then. You're just a computer. A judge is supposed to apply the human condition to the law. Otherwise, you're just a computer. You're just some kind of processing element. An LLM would do a better job than those kind of judges, in my opinion.
The time is coming when LLMs will be the backbone of our legal system. We may already be there. But I actually have another thought. Do you think that the nonprofit status, okay, there are good nonprofits out there. Before we had any kind of welfare state, like before the New Deal, churches managed almost all of the social assistance in the United States. Churches and like the Moose Lodge or whatever, fraternal societies, however
fraternal
you want to call
orders.
them. Yeah, these nonprofit groups basically ran social assistance for people who were down on their luck, right? Which is why that's my understanding is that's why they are excluded from having to pay taxes. It seems now, though, that there's just a toxic incentive that's way too high. Like if Don wanted to go start the Church of Don, which I could go into some details on. I have some good ideas. Don could run the classic like LLC grift where your LLC owns everything. You minimize your taxes. You write everything off without the tax element. If it's a religious ministry, so the ministry of Don. Should we just turn the Don and Brederick program into a ministry and minimize our tax bill?
That's fascinating.
Maybe we shouldn't.
I could see it going there, maybe trajectorily. I mean, you get some pretty serious, listeners. And we're going to address one of our listeners later in the program. We hear you, we love you, and we love the audience. So I could see us going there. I think that this is one of these kind of slippery slope type things, but it's very obvious now that a lot of these NGOs, these non-governmental organizations, these so-called nonprofits, like a lot of them are actually just like you said, tax schemes where instead of having so-called true believers, and there are many true believers in the Mormon church, there's many true believers in American Protestantism, Catholic, like all of these, there's a lot of like very genuine people there. We're not talking about those people again. I know we have brain dead audience members, and we're not talking about them. We're talking about the grifters right now, and we're talking about the obvious people. I remember watching an interview with like the guy who was one of these Satanist churches, and he was like very explicit. He's like, we think it's, all this religious stuff is wrong and fake, so we are intentionally going to be taking advantage of the laws set up to exploit them, and their idea was to undermine them.
I will say devout Satanists are very upset with those non-Satan believing Satanists.
Exactly.
They're posers. Regardless,
Yeah.
that's a whole different rabbit hole. There is tension within the Satanist community among stuff like this as well.
I have heard that. I do not know any Satanists personally, but I have met Satanists, and I would agree with your assessment. They are they range from grifters to, again, some very disturbed people. I don't know how you possibly
devout Satanists, are interesting.
But that's kind of where, that's going to be, I think, a theme maybe on this podcast, is trying to tease out like these subtleties when it's a little bit more loosey goosey. But this is one of these. Like, okay, if you're running a church and you own more real estate than like Exxon Mobil, like, okay, we have to start asking some questions here. Like, what's going on? Why do you guys have all this money that's been built up? I thought you were supposed to give like all of this money out to the poor, and they're going to come up with some reason. Well, this is a capital asset that we use to actually carry out our mission. And they'll come up with some, clown, circus reason of why they need all this stuff. But to your point, it's like, no, like it's obvious that you guys are just building up wealth and you're not actually doing the services that you claim. That's a problem.
Well, let me talk about the Mormons here, specifically because we started by talking about this lady in the screenshot who is a Mormon missionary. I met the exact analog of this woman when I was in college. I was walking through the University of Michigan Diag, go blue, and the Diag, they'd always have different people of different religious affiliations trying to convert you set up there. There was the guy who had the big sign that would say something like sin, and it would say like, it'd be an acronym like sodomy, investiture, scandal,
infidelity, maybe
NASCAR. Yeah. Just these ridiculous acronyms. You'd have the Jewish pastors who are like trying to convert all the secular Jews. They're like, you don't have to be a secular Jew. And they're like, no, we can't do this right now. You'd have like the Hare Krishnas doing their Hare Krishna dance. I learned to just walk through all of this and zone it out. Until the most successful religious proselytization I encountered was a woman exactly like this. She came right up to me, and she and her partner, who looked just like her, they stopped me and they go, excuse me, sir, do you have a moment? And I was like, yeah, I have a moment. Okay, we have a question for you. And I'm like, oh, okay, what is the question? And they go, okay, have you heard of Jesus? And I was like, yeah, I've heard of Jesus. I'm familiar with this Jesus guy. And they're like, okay, cool. Another 3-second pause. Did you know that Jesus came to America? And then I was like, whoa. I need to hear this.
Yes.
Dude, and they got me hooked, man. They walked me through. They're like, yeah, look, so then like Levi and Nephi and the Israelites came over too, and then and they had this book and this diagram and the like, business cards, like, here, call me at this number. Dude, they were locked in. They knew exactly what they were doing, and I was actually impressed. I gained respect for Mormonism because it did not feel like they were wasting my time. I politely declined to join the Church of the Latter-day Saints, but they as Don has worked in sales before, these people were good at sales. I mean, they were trained, locked and loaded, high motivation, mission oriented, with a solid pitch, to be honest. Do you know Jesus? Yeah, everyone knows Jesus. Do you know Jesus came to America? What? It's a great pitch. She's about to, I bet you if you watch this video at like second 20, she would drop that. It would be the exact same script. The script works. There's a lot of Mormons.
I would agree with everything you just said, Don, and I actually have like 10 more things to say. But we have limited time. in this episode, and we have other really good topics that I think we need to get to. So maybe you can usher in our next topic.
You're right, Brederick. And I'm sad to let this topic go, because when you were talking about churches owning everything, all I could think about was when the Catholic Church owned like all of Western Europe. It's a rabbit hole, man. It's worse than a rabbit hole. It's a deep well of information. So we have to go to the next topic.
That's why we do this every week, Don. We will do this every week until the end of time.
Yeah. Dear listeners, come back in the future for us to analyze, for us to rewind the clock on religion and money to the year 0 or year 100, whatever. Yeah, there's a lot to talk about. Yeah. Okay.
Next topic.
Next topic. I want to introduce this by saying I, Don Daguerre, have been on a media diet. What does that mean? It means I'm trying to do like a keto media, psychic keto, high protein. What is your high protein media? For me, high protein media is Doomberg and Canadian Prepper. They've had several interviews together, but I watched an interview.
I'm sorry, I have to interrupt you there really quickly, Don, because just so we're clear, those are two different media personalities. One of them is someone named Doomberg. That's a play on Bloomberg. And they're a very interesting, kind of geopolitical. It's the
opposite of Bloomberg.
Yeah. It's a geopolitical, it's a commodities trader, financier, commentator channel. Very interesting person. And the second person is Canadian Prepper, who is a kind of a classic, ready for the apocalypse, ready for collapse of society kind of guy. I believe he's located in Western Canada. So I just wanted to say, to interpret what Don just said, because I'm not sure the audience captured it, these are two people who Don really appreciates and influences a lot of his worldview because they share very credible ideas. Back to you.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Brederick, for that interjection. Yes, audience, Doomberg runs a Substack, great Substack. It's a paid Substack, but you can read the stubs of the articles for free, and even the stubs are very informative. Doomberg likes to write about economics topics in depth. They had one post, for example, that was called Magnesium PI, talking about global magnesium markets. I mean, they'll get down into the specific chemicals and elements and then trace them through the global economy and talk about the implications. Canadian Prepper primarily runs a YouTube channel, but also sells prepping supplies on his web store. Mm-hmm. I've been following Canadian Prepper since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022 because I thought that Canadian Prepper, of any of the channels I could find on YouTube, had the best non-propagandized content. And I think that comes from, one, him being Canadian and not American, and two, being located in the Western Hemisphere, in North America. He was still forced to think kind of from the point of view of your average American because, you're pretty closely tied to the United States. But he was able to take a step back from a lot of the politicization of news. So when these two guys jump on a podcast together, it's going to be fire. All right, that was a good preamble. Here's what they talked about. And I sent this interview to Brederick, and he listened to it as well. It was a long interview, like an hour and 20 minutes?
Something like that. I just had a long drive. That was the only reason I was able to fit it into my life.
Thank God for long drives, giving opportunities for such a thing.
Maybe you can tell us about kind of the key focus that you found interesting in the way that they described markets, because they said a lot of stuff, man, and we don't have all time, all day.
Yep. If I can summarize it as briefly as possible, Canadian Prepper and Doomberg had a fundamental disagreement that they spent most of the interview arguing back and forth. Canadian Prepper believed that the oil market has been manipulated ruthlessly. If for any of our audience that remembers, a war started in the Middle East between the United States and Iran and some other parties, and people expected oil to hit like $150 a barrel. It did not. In fact, people were kind of shocked. Many people, when oil futures stayed under $100, even during even before the memorandum of understanding. Doomberg claimed that this actually was not market manipulation and there was some logic to it. And that precipitated this very interesting discussion that Brederick and I are going to try to break down the details for you, the interesting details. So that's it. Media diet. There's a great argument. Was the oil market manipulated or not? Canadian Prepper says manipulated. Doomberg says not manipulated. Don and Brederick will get into why. So, Brederick, what did you think about the debate that they had? And who did you side with?
Well, I always appreciate debate is a strong word. It was a nice discussion, similar to the ones we have on the program here. They were definitely people who respected each other and appreciated each other, and just had different opinions. And we used to be really good at that in America, actually. And that has fallen apart in the last couple of years. So in that spirit, we're going to try to kind of bring some of that back. So I thought that everything that Doomberg was saying made a lot of sense. And basically his entire argument was the stock market versus the commodities market, specifically the commodities within oil, are very different. And the reason that they're different is because the whole purpose of the oil futures and commodities market is to get raw crude oil from wellheads to refineries. Whereas the purpose of the stock market is to raise kind of risk capital for corporations to invest it back in the business and then hopefully bring a return on that risk capital. But there's something quite different about the oil market, and that is the fact that you actually have to deliver the oil and you actually have to use the oil. And oil is what is called a semi-perishable product, which means once it comes out of the ground, it actually has like a lifespan. It doesn't live forever. It degrades. So his basic argument was saying that like the mechanics of that market, because of that, are very, very, very different. And also due to the fact that the distributors are all around the world, the players are all around the world, the consumers are all around the world, and the magnitude of the market is so gargantuan in terms of the dollars and the physical quantity of materials just moving around that it's like basically impossible to manipulate.
There are levers that you can put your hands on that you can yank, like emptying a strategic petroleum reserve, but you can't manipulate the market in the way that maybe people were imagining, right? I think Canadian Prepper was kind of imagining, I'm not going to lie, I thought the same thing watching oil futures over the past few months. I think both Canadian Prepper and myself assumed that there was like this secret group in the government that was contacting all different oil companies and being like, you need to sell at this price. You know, you need to do things at this price. If you don't, we'll disappear you or will, release compromising photos. Where Doomberg was like, no, it's a little more, it's more complicated and it's more simple. He kept using the phrase forcing function, which I thought was interesting. This function in the structure of the market that forces behavior. And comparing it to the stock market, like he said, a barrel of oil is worthless until it gets to a refinery. And there's exceptions, which Canadian Prepper brought up. Like sometimes you can burn crude for electricity, but it's not very common. For the most part, like it needs to get to a refinery, and as you said, it's perishable. A stock can live forever, and with that, there's no forcing function, like you said, that is dictating the flow or dynamics of this thing. It's just created, and then there's an infinite auction.
Yeah,
bidding
and you
the
can
price
create
up to wherever,
and you can create more of them. Which is, there's a term in a lot of these commodities things called stock to flow. And that is, what is the stock? How much of it is there out there versus how much is exchanged? So people talk a lot about that too. And stocks, they can just issue more stocks, but in order to get more crude, you actually need a very well developed, kind of pipeline that usually takes years, if you will. Not a physical pipeline, but you have people out there looking for oil. You have all these test wells. Then wells prove to be productive. Most don't, even with today's technology. And then they kind of go forward, and then you get a barrel of oil. That's a huge investment versus like, we're going to IPO and file with the SEC. That's a much simpler process to get stock certificates.
Now, I want you to correct me here if I'm wrong, because this was not mentioned in the podcast directly, as far as, or the interview, as far as I can remember. But when you talk about stock and flow, the stock of the stock market, like the extant stocks, usually just grows continuously. Like stocks can be taken out of circulation, I think usually with share buybacks.
Yeah.
But brought out of the market. But I think for the most part, like the aggregate amount of purchasable stock grows. I don't know at what rate, but definitely linear or more.
I don't know either, but it can drop out too. If the price of a stock drops down too much, a market will delist it. Like the NYSE, the New York Stock Exchange. I think if it drops much below like $1 or whatever, or 10 cents, something like that, they will like delist your stock. They'll be like, this is not something we're interested in trading anymore. I think a lot of those, that's another way. That's basically the company is going bankrupt.
Right. But it's not as set in stone. A barrel of oil typically has a place that it needs to go to, right? Like the stock is getting consumed as soon as it can after it's produced. It's not just sitting around indefinitely. I don't know. It's an interesting conversation because before at a different episode of the program, I had lamented that markets are rigged and are fake and don't do anything. And when Canadian Prepper kind of floated that to Doomberg was like, okay, maybe the stock market, because there are so many participants that don't have a lot of information, like retail traders, and because of the nature and structure of the market, it's easy to pump prices and create bubbles and create irrational behavior. But the oil market, the people actually trading oil futures and setting up these contracts are grizzled veterans. The number of participants in that market that are actually buying and selling is a tiny slice of, SEAL Team 6 level traders compared to the giant set of people participating in the stock market. So the nature.
Yeah. But
go ahead.
Okay. You keep going and
I was just saying that the properties of markets can be so different depending on their structure. You almost need to treat different markets. This is how my mental model is kind of evolving. You almost need to treat different markets like different elements on the periodic table, where they can have completely different emergent properties, even though they're all elements, right? Or they're all markets. The housing market, the stock market, the oil market. I mean, these things are so different in their structure and composition that they are hard to be considered, to be analyzed analogously. That's my
totally.
thought.
No, totally. I mean, they're completely different animals. I mean, even just looking at something, and I know there's a lot of members of our audience who have stopped listening because they have no understanding of what we're talking about. So let me just give you an example of one thing that illustrates what Don is talking about. So the housing market, which is something that we've talked about on the program before, physical houses, right? There's a market for those, right? There's a price that the seller puts up, and then there is a price that the buyers are interested in buying. Sometimes that is very consistent and analogous. That's when there's like a lot of liquidity in the housing market. It's like houses are selling for this and people have money to buy them, okay? But it is a discrete, large physical asset that you're actually transacting. And it usually takes, in most states, 30 to 60 days to actually clear a real estate transaction, okay? Versus a stock market, for example, the New York Stock Exchange, you can clear a trade usually within a few seconds because it's the exact same process of there's people who have stocks and there's people who have cash. There is what's called a spot price, which is you just buy it, and then you grab the the asset and you give them the cash and it clears, and the governing body is the stock exchange. So that would be one example. Like the liquidity of the asset itself in the trade is it's easy to settle the trade. That would be one example of why markets are very different.
I would love to hear in the future or learn more about some other markets that I'm sure exhibit completely different traits because of their composition, like electricity, copper, labor. I mean, there's so many different markets that when I really take a step back, the underlying structure and forcing functions, as Doomberg says, are so different that they are kind of like, what's the right word? Sui generis. I don't know how to say that.
I have no idea what you're even referring to.
Well, it's a pretentious Latin term that means of its own nature. You were good to point out that we the poor audience. I hope you're still listening. To those who are still listening, you're the real ones. This is some nitty-gritty stuff. We appreciate you.
I think you want me to tell you this actually brings up an interesting opportunity that I have observed in life, and you pointed it out, so I'm just going to bring my interpretation to it. So you were like, he kept using the word forcing function. And having studied a little too much math in my day, I think that's a math term. And basically what that is that's like a term in solving typically like differential equations, partial differential equations as well, like all this whole class of math. And that's basically like energy getting pumped into the system or boundary conditions that are kind of forcing the evolution of something. So I think it's kind of one of those things, the step back, you're like, you can look at the words that people use and they kind of betray things about their training or their history. And it's like, this guy was obviously a quant trader because he is thinking about things in terms of this like big hardcore mathematical lens. And it's like, there's a forcing function. And he uses that term, but it's like the reality of that is the oil goes bad. So you need to sell it. That's a forcing function. Like you need to use it, not sell it. You need to use it. And so that's kind of just for our audience, that's an interesting observation where if people are using terms in odd ways, you can kind of start to learn like, what's their history? Why are they using that term like that? Because it often means they know more about what they're talking about if they use a weird word like that than maybe you think they know.
Well, Brederick, I'm about to go on a rip here on a tangential topic that's not directly related. So if it's time to go to the next topic, you just give me the timeout signal. Be like, no, I think we should
go to the next topic, man. I think we need to go to the next topic.
I need to say one more thing. I need to say one more thing about
Don't
what you said.
offer me an ultimatum and then not do the ultimatum. Okay, what's
You're
your
right.
last
Okay,
thing?
next topic.
What's your last thing? Now the audience is on the edge of their
I was just going to say that math vocabulary, like you said, forcing function. Go to a party in San Francisco. You hear people saying manifold, orthogonal, stuff like that. I had to look up a lot of these terms, and that vocabulary does give you a richer conceptual understanding. Like I know last time on the program we talked about atoms and how you can know that they're real. I brought up the being able to take out a microscope and see cells and see paramecium. Your mental model is broadened by seeing the granular details. I think maybe the words like forcing function and some of this more sophisticated conceptual vocabulary, it almost seems like a microscope for systems. You're able to describe dynamic systems in more granular detail in their structure. And so I don't know if it makes me upset. Upset isn't the right word. It makes me feel, I'm sad that more people, that this is considered hardcore math in the sense of something that's inaccessible to the wider population, because I would love for everyone to be able to describe systems, myself included, in detail and be able to look under the hood and not deal in reductive, broad concepts like all markets are the same. That's all I got to say. We're going to have to do another topic on another episode about math terminology that is actually helpful.
Well, I'll just comment on that finally, and then we can move on. But it's like, I mean, math is just another tool. Language is another tool to describe things, like actual natural language, right? Like English or Spanish or Chinese or something like that. And I was just talking with my wife about this, how there are certain English words, as you learn more words, it allows you to express yourself more precisely. It's the same thing with math often, and that's the whole idea of like these better models. Like we're talking about, how do we better explain gravity? How do we better explain, electromagnetic forces, all these different things. And those come with, more expressive math. But in terms of your comment about a party in San Francisco, yeah, I mean, a lot of that is just pretension, but a lot of it is actually like descriptive. Like I remember very vividly, I took kind of a second class in linear algebra. You usually take like an intro one, you take like a differential equations class, and then often you'll take like a second one, which is like a real proper algebra class. Fundamentally changed the way that I interact with the world. Like once I understood kind of what vector spaces were and all those things. So I would agree with you. I think things would be a lot clearer. People would be a lot more robust in terms of their thinking if they were to study more classical things like this. This was traditionally what was supposed to be a liberal education, like a liberal arts education. You were supposed to learn stuff like that.
You were supposed to learn proof-based linear algebra?
No, I mean, that was part of learning logic.
In Bowdoin.
Learning logic, yeah, for sure, dude.
Okay.
Learning logic.
Yeah, logic.
All right, next topic. I insist.
Next topic. Okay, and yet next topic. This is another item off my plate of my media diet this week. In addition to the great Doomberg and Canadian Prepper interview, I watched a short video from Real Clear Tax, who is an excellent YouTube account, and it was on the yen carry trade. All right, I'm going to introduce this for our audience who may need some context. First, the yen. What is the yen? The yen is the national currency of Japan, similar to how the dollar is the national currency of the United States. Similar to the dollar, which is controlled by the Federal Reserve, there's a central bank of Japan that controls the yen. The yen and the dollar and almost all other currencies in the world float against each other in value. Some currencies, like the Chinese currency, are pegged where they can't freely float, but the yen freely floats. And what that means is the value can just change depending on how much people want to pay for yen. The yen carry trade is a phenomenon that evolved because Japan has kept interest rates so low for Japanese debt. I think around 1%. For I can't remember when that started. For a very long time.
They were negative for a while.
Yeah, you can borrow money from Japan at absurdly low rates. And so what people would do all over the world is they would borrow yen at an interest rate of 1%, and then they would go and buy dollar-denominated assets that would yield like 3 to 4% and just pocket the difference. This is starting to unwind, is the term the finance people use. And I've been trying to follow this on finance Twitter over the past few months, and there was always people freaking out about the yen carry trade, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, okay, I don't know what this is. It doesn't really matter. But it seems like something very serious has happened in the past few days. Or maybe it was in the past week. Very recently, something serious has happened with this. And Brederick, please take the audience, or take the perspective of an audience member that doesn't know anything about this and intervene when the context is not sufficient.
Get to the implications, because I just worry that people don't know what you're talking about, man.
All right, the government debt. There is the government debt of the United States is owned by many different countries, but Japan owns the most government debt. To keep the value of the yen high enough so that the yen doesn't lose too much value, they were forced to start selling U.S. debt to buy yen. Just like anything else, if you sell a ton of it at once, the value goes down. And there's an inverse relationship in debt, so in bonds, government bonds, where if you sell it, the interest rate in the secondary market will go up, and the government will have to pay more on their debt. Long story short, the United States were like, Japan, you cannot sell our debt to cover the yen, because if you do that, we will have to pay a lot more on our debt. Instead, we're going to take these euros that we have on hand, because the treasury just had some euros somewhere, and we're going to buy yen for you to strengthen the yen. And then shortly after that, the United States just did treasury buybacks and printed money to buy their own debt on the secondary market. This is way too high context, isn't it, Brederick?
It is.
Why is this bad? Okay, basically, the United States needs to stop people from selling government debt that they own. Japan is the biggest, the person who owns it the most. They are trying to sell it. The United States is doing everything they can to stop them from selling it. I think the second biggest owner of U.S. debt is the UK, followed by, China. China has been selling treasuries many times for many years. I think since 2022, they've been selling treasuries and buying gold. This is all related to. Okay, let me back up and try again to tell everyone, why is this important to you? These are all signs of a sovereign debt crisis. And it seems weird, but the United States and Japan are very closely tied here. The United States needs Japan to buy U.S. debt. Japan is the biggest buyer. Japan cannot sell it, but Japan needs to sell it to strengthen the yen. If the yen loses too much value, it's very hard for the Japanese to buy imports. They are an island. The most of what they need comes via imports. And the yen carry trade, all of these people that borrowed yen when the interest rate was really low, well, they're trying to fight inflation. They need to raise the interest rate on yen. I mean, that's going to hurt those people that were depending on cheap money from Japan. The global economy is so complicated.
Let me try to help you out
slice.
Here. Let me try to help you out
help
here,
me, Brederick.
because this is something that I think my takeaways on this are a couple. Okay, and this is the takeaway for the audience. I think this stuff is extremely confusing, and unless you are able to actually be like a forex or a foreign currency exchange trader, this stuff is really complicated. So maybe we can just break it down from a couple of the elements of the story of why this is crazy and why this is like very bad sign for a lot of different people. One of them is just how the story broke, because everyone will understand this. Okay. This like Japanese, like the US Treasury is buying Japanese yen or whatever, broke because of what was obviously a staged media event. Did you hear about this, Don? Where
yes.
Camera person looked over Secretary Bessent, the Secretary of Treasury of the United States of America. This is one of the most powerful financial people on the planet. And he had just written like to do by however many billion in Japanese yen or whatever. And then he wrote like JPY. Okay. And this was silly and stupid because this is not how a guy at this level operates. And so this was clearly some kind of a media control scheme and this, that, and the other, which points to kind of the implications for normal people is they're trying to do damage control and trying to do odd things here. If we just want to step back really quickly and say like what's actually going on, I'll try to give you a very high level explanation to summarize what you said. The U.S. spends too much money. We don't have that money. This is part of our major problem right now. So we're selling bonds to people who will give us their money. So then we can spend their money. And we tell them, hey, we'll pay you back in the future. Japan has done that a lot. But Japan is having some problems. And so they're like, actually, we're going to take those IOUs that America has given them, right? And Japan's like, I'm going to trade this to somebody else, and you're going to have to pay somebody else. Now, right, that means there's more IOUs from the United States federal government on the global market, which means the price of those goes down, right? Which means that asset is more risky because less people want it, which means interest rates go up for Americans to borrow money. So basically, the high level signal is this on the global market. America isn't as good of an investment as it used to be. And that's because we're run by idiots. In the broad sense, circling back, because they do things like, oh, we're going to announce this via an over-the-shoulder cabinet meeting thing. Oh, I'm the president of the United States. I'm going to sell access to my Truth Social card at $100,000 a month because I'm giving away information to people. Oh, all my kids are going to go buy bunkers and islands and stuff like this. So I think the takeaway from this story is like, stop electing idiots and learn a little bit about supply and demand. Learn a little bit when it says the national debt. What does that mean? It's not some fake number that keeps going up. It has real implications. There you go.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think another thing I want to say is this is uncommon. This is not common. To put it in simpler terms, this would be like looking out your window and seeing smoke. It's not common. Most people don't have fires happening every day. Like this is kind of smoke from a fire. And It seems esoteric. It's part of a complicated system that most people don't have exposure to, but it's smoke. This is not a common occurrence. And Frederick, you put it so simply, this is ultimately about Japan is going broke and the U.S. is going broke, and they rely on each other, right? And when nobody wants to buy U.S. debt, when people want to stop lending us money, this is a signal of that breaking down, which is very bad for everyone.
The problem, though, is we have been in a situation now over the last, I'm just going to say 20 years, where people have heard this so many times that people don't believe the doomsdayers anymore because there's been so much financial engineering going on, and they lie about all the inflation numbers. And so, like, when people want to say things like, oh, why is housing so expensive? This would be one example of why it's so expensive. But the underlying fundamental principle is we're spending too much money and we don't have a hard basis to our currency. So the government can print pieces of paper and manipulate all of these things in crazy ways that ultimately just steal the purchasing power of the value of private citizens' dollars. That's the underlying mechanism that drives the majority of all of this. That's the takeaway.
Mm-hmm. I have another thing to say, Brederick, and I'm going to ask you to stand on the sidelines again and jump in and save me if I'm going off the rails.
Okay.
There with treasury markets specifically, and so this is the secondary market for government debt, government bonds, whether it's United States government bonds or Japanese government bonds. There are people besides countries that buy this as well. A lot of companies, private individuals will buy this debt. This debt on the secondary market can change in value. So correct me if I'm wrong, Brederick, from what you understand
totally true.
here.
Yeah.
The governments will issue debt regularly, and they'll be like, here, buy this for X amount of dollars, and over 30 years, you will get paid interest and the principal. And then when that reaches the secondary market, basically, people are like, how much do you want to pay to get this flow of interest from a very reliable source, which is the United States government? Do you remember when Silicon Valley Bank collapsed in 2024, I believe? Or was it 2023?
I do. It was 23.
My understanding of what happened there is they had a ton of U.S. treasuries on their book.
Yep.
And the value of those treasuries on the secondary market. So if they needed to sell those treasuries, they were worth less because the government had just raised interest rates. And there's an inverse relationship. As interest rates go up, they become more risky. People want to pay less for the actual face value of the bond. And when they were forced to sell stuff, when they were margin called, they had to sell all of these treasuries that had suddenly massively reduced in value. If that's a private company or like a bank who could go out of business because they've been holding on to these treasuries that they're suddenly forced to sell. that's kind of what's happening to the country of Japan. They have all these treasuries, and they're getting to a point where they're forced to sell them. So the Japanese are dealing with this problem right now, but there's a lot of other people that hold U.S. treasuries. And if they're pinched enough where they are forced to sell those treasuries, supply and demand, lots of people selling treasuries at once is very, very bad for the United States to be able to borrow money and pay its debt. And I think that's what the Treasury Secretary is freaking out about right now. It's not just Japan. Japan is just the first fire on the horizon, the first smoke.
That's called a bond collapse. Exactly. And it's basically, it's like the paper isn't any good anymore. And yeah, I worry the last two topics have been way too in the weeds, frankly, and maybe we should get some feedback from people in the future. But all of these things can come back to principles that everyday people understand. And they try, this is like a classic thing. This is a social commentary, I'll tell you. There's these issues, and people who are more left-leaning always say this. They'll say like, well, it's actually like really complicated. And they have this like soft voice, and they're like, it's a complicated thing. Like homelessness is not that simple. Like it's very complicated and it's multidimensional. No, it's not. A lot of these issues are really not that complicated. Once someone will just explain them to you in very simple language. So I'll say two things. One, yeah, this is great. This is not great. And the fundamental reason is bonds are great when you're investing in things that actually enable productivity from your society. Like, hey, let's invest in the Golden Gate Bridge. This is going to unlock a lot of economic value in the Bay Area. It's going to make it more connected. We will bring more economic return to the Bay Area than this bridge costs. That's a great use of a bond structure because the bridge is going to be here in 100 years and that generation is going to use it. They should help pay for this bridge. That's like what bonds were supposed to be designed for, to have a return on some kind of long-term investment. What it's not great for is paying Social Security, because Social Security is consuming and being consumed right now. There's no payback on that money. I mean, you can make some kind of secondary and tertiary arguments on the fallouts of how that impacts like generations and this, that, and the other. But like paying a bunch of people who are retired money from money that we don't have because we're currently running a deficit, and that is a major part of our budget, that is an unsustainable thing. And people in Japan, there's many, many, many people in Japan, and many, many, many of them are very, very smart, okay? And they're looking at and they're saying, you know, these assets, you know, who's going to pay all this back to us? I know the United States is great, and they've got, 12 carrier groups and all this stuff, but like they don't have enough cash flow to actually pay us back. I mean, they've never defaulted before, but I'm just starting to be a little bit hesitant. I'm going to pay you a little bit less money for that future guarantee. That is what all of this is about. It's that simple. The signal is very obvious. We need to get our house in order because people are noticing and they're not buying our debt.
Yeah. Thanks for that, Brederick. I agree with you. I wanted to circle back to something that you said, that we really got into the weeds with these topics, and we would love feedback from our listeners. How can we do this better? I'm very passionate about these topics. I know Brederick is as well. And one of the purposes of the program is to communicate stuff like this simply to the people so that everyone can understand it. And that's a challenge when you get into topics that have a lot of complexity, but it's important because these topics will impact your lives more than almost any other system. I mean, a bond collapse or a currency crisis, a sovereign debt crisis in the United States will impact everyone deeply and will be one of the biggest events of the 21st century, if not the biggest. Yeah. And I going forward, I want to shoulder the challenge of explaining topics like this effectively in a way that everyone can understand. I charged into it being like, I can do this, but you may need to go watch the Canadian Prepper and Doomberg interview and Real Clear Tax on the yen carry trade, because they're masters. They can do it better than I can.
I'm going to push back on you on your own self-critique, because I think there's two things to be said. One of them is the point of this program is exactly like what you just said, and we're going to push the envelope. We're going to try to bring our audience along with us. I think there's something where it's like you and I understand this stuff, but then when it actually comes to trying to explain it, you're kind of like, well, maybe I don't understand it as well as I thought I do. But at the same time, it's kind of like there are so many things going on that like no one really understands this. Mm-hmm. Just to put it in perspective, Doomberg got the oil prediction market wrong.
Right.
He got it wrong. And that was his whole point in coming on, was to say like, hey, I'm a humble person. This is why I think I got it wrong. And this is why I think what you're saying is like not at all correct. So I'm coming to your aid on that.
I appreciate that.
Of course, dude. But then two, it's like, you know, if this is like a control theory thing, and what we're doing is we are not in an overshoot. Like we're in an overshoot. We're trying to figure out where is the audience and where are we with topic wise. And if we don't overshoot, all that means is we're not actually doing you, the audience, the service. Because if we're not willing to risk confusion to bring you topics that are of critical importance to your life, what are we doing here?
And maybe we can start linking resources, because it's hard to give a full comprehensive picture of a high context topic in a 20-minute segment. So we can do start trying to provide the audience with resources if they want to dig deeper, to take the burden of full explanation off of ourselves in a single segment. That's all I have to say on that. Thanks for rescuing me on those topics, Brederick. Very important topics. Everyone pay attention to the debt situation and the treasury market. It's there's a lot more I can say about it, but it's definitely one of the most important signals for what the people in power are thinking about and the decisions they need to make. Yes, Brederick.
Can I make one more just conspiracy theory little hat comment here?
Yeah. We haven't had any conspiracy theories yet today. Please.
You brought up the Silicon Valley Bank situation, and I just want to say that like there is a very like nice and cookie cutter like financial reason that you can explain why that bank basically went under, and they were doing some really, really not smart things. Basically, you shouldn't be buying big long-term treasury bonds as a bank. That's not what you're supposed to be doing. You're supposed to be maintaining liquidity in your bank, because when people come asking for your money, they need it back. They don't want 10-year treasuries. They want dollars, okay? So basically all I'm going to say is that. But what did Silicon Valley Bank do? Who were their primary customers? Were Silicon Valley startups. Many of them were in the crypto space, which at this time was doing a lot of disruption in the more traditional finance world. And there were also two other banks that are much lesser known that also went bankrupt at that time, but they were much smaller banks, but they were similar things. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite the audience that if they're interested to actually dig a little bit deeper into that, because all is not as it seems when those banks went under. And there is some very rich conspiracy theory field or soil, if you will, in that space of why those banks actually went under. So I'm gonna leave a teaser.
To market. That's my teaser. Mark to market.
Yeah. I mean, there's just some interesting things there. So you should check it out if you're interested in learning more about that.
Well, I think with that, we can move on to our final topic, which is more of a bucket, a multi-subtopic bucket. And that is just what's going on with expeditionary warfare. It's time to dive into the expeditionary warfare bucket. Brederick, do you want to lead this one off?
Well, you have brought up something that's interesting, and it is actually a like board game that illustrates wargaming, I guess is the right way. Here, I will share my screen to show you the actual, can I do this? Where are you? Sorry. Yes. Okay. Got it. So, oh no, I'm very sorry about this, guys. This is extremely embarrassing.
Let me then, while you're pulling up the image for those watching, I can briefly describe what you're talking about. There's a long history of war games, board games that the military uses to train for war, and these can be typically they're very boring games with spreadsheets, and they're very esoteric. Nobody plays them outside of like the Naval War College. But popular tabletop games are derived from these war games. So Dungeons and Dragons and a lot of other tabletop games are descended or derived from the military wargaming tradition. This guy, Sebastian Bay at Georgetown, a former Marine, made this game called Littoral Commander Indo-Pacific. And there's a Baltics version as well. This game stands out because it's not made for officers. It's actually made for non-commissioned officers. So it's a little less complicated than some of the wargaming that they would do at maybe, I don't know, what's that big think tank?
Annapolis or
the
Rand Corporation.
Yeah, it's a little simpler, and they even have you can play the same version that the military has. Well, the wide availability of this board game has been noticed, and Sebastian Bay on Twitter saw that not only are the United States Marine Corps non-commissioned officers playing his game, Littoral Commander Indo-Pacific, but the People's Liberation Army Navy is also playing this game. So everyone who has a stake in the Indo-Pacific theater seems to be playing this hot new tabletop game. And for anyone in the audience that wants to play, please contact Don or Brederick. We would love to get our hands into this game and play it. But the Chinese playing this game specifically is notable. What do you think about that, Frederick?
It is interesting, and I think that wargaming, sand tables, were kind of these old school things, but it's basically trying to teach people strategy. And my wife loves board games. I don't love board games because I do board games for work all day using computers to solve the kind of similar problems. So I kind of scratch that itch when I'm at work of let's solve interesting kind of game theoretic would be the term, right? Like this game theory, you've got two different people and they're trying to play a game and they're trying to win. And I think they're very interesting, and I'm really glad that people are kind of thinking through this. Obviously, I think something like this signals hey, we're dealing with very smart people on the other sides of these game theoretic things. And one of the problems with a democracy, at least the way that it's been instantiated in the United States, is the corrective mechanism for bad decision-making is supposed to be elections, right? It's you have a leader, they've made a decision. It didn't go well. It had implications for your people. How do they check that leadership? Okay. In the democracy, it's elections. Now, if your people can't read, as we've pointed out in the program before, they can't start to understand complex things like the Japanese carry trade, right? They can't start to understand these things, and then now they're susceptible to all sorts of propaganda and all sorts of manipulation. Okay. So I look at a board game like this and I immediately go to, man, we're dealing with some smart folks over there that are really playing these games in a very smart way. And I use the term game as a theoretical sense. We're talking about a major war in the Pacific, something like we haven't seen since World War II. And these guys are trying to strategically think out okay, if I'm on this island and I have limits in what I can get to that island, is it worth holding that island? Do I retreat? Do I actually pop to this island because it's a little closer to this choke point where then I make it so ships can't get through there? How does air power play into all this? And I think it's very interesting that people are doing this. And I'm just on a little bit of a rant myself now. We're just on a rant this morning. But I guess I'm just saying I think it's really important to have strategic thinking. I think it's really important to have multi-step thinking. It's not just the next move, right? Everyone has played one of these games and they've been ahead. And then 20 minutes later, they lose in some way that they didn't see coming, right?
Well,
we need people
a point
to learn
of a game like this is that you can get many iterations on doing what you would have to do in real life where you would only get one chance, right? You need to simulate something. You need to try your absolute best to simulate something that in real life you only get N of 1. Yeah. And if you were fighting a war in the Pacific, you would have to do what this game tries to simulate. You have some ships and you have some ground forces and you have logistical constraints on all of those. You have so many missiles for, long range strike. You have so many interceptors for defending against long range strikes. You have so many supplies. You can only move so far. You have all of these constraints, and then you try to go through a ton of different iterations and force yourself into decision-making pickles, for lack of a better word, that you would encounter in a real-life situation. And you have to practice that because because you will be doing the exact same thing. You will be staring at a map with little depictions of your forces being like, oh, shit, what do I do now? This could go really bad. And getting as many iterations of that as possible is really important. I know that's done in different industries. Like I've heard that businesses will simulate or war game out like a new business strategy. To your point about the government and democracy, I don't know if this happens in the government. I hope that it does. Do they war game out like, well, what happens if, let's simulate these different iterations if we print way too much money and what happens in the next 12 months?
No, people are definitely thinking that way and thinking strategically. But I'm just saying that we in America, maybe we should back up and I should explain my point a little bit more. I guess what I'm trying to say is right now in America, often who wins these elections is who's got the better zinger on some Instagram video, right? I mean, the people who are winning from Donald Trump to AOC to all these different people who are in office, they often are just to even Barack Obama, like just very well-spoken people often win these elections. Barack Obama was not a good president. That is not a partisan statement. He just wasn't that good. He was not a like giant strategic thinker with the level of acumen as say an FDR. I'm sorry, that's just not the case. You need to get over it. And so what I'm saying is, but he was an extremely likable, extremely charismatic, good-looking guy that really took social media into the first like genuine political move and won that election in a landslide. He beat out, I think, a far superior opposition candidate, Romney, who, love him or hate him, the guy is an incredibly intelligent, well thought out, strategic thinker. He's talking about how 42% of Americans won't vote for him because of the payments and this, that, and the other. And it's like that stuff just doesn't sell because it's this popularity contest. And so what I'm saying is when I see this game, I'm like, oh, wow, this is actually real life. Like hardware matters, like strategic thinking matters. That's how we won World War II, amongst many things. That's how we did a lot of what we do. We don't have it anymore because we're electing the person who says the best zinger in some a social media post or sounds the best in a speech isn't actually proved out in any real way. That's what I think it is. We could give you many examples of that up and down our decision-making structure.
Well, I wonder if they have simulation games similar to this where people can practice social media zingers and communication strategy. I mean, isn't that kind of what the focus group is?
That's called a burner account, dude.
Okay. Yeah.
I mean, the focus group, I think traditionally was trying to understand what a general what a general person in a population thought about something. So they'd be like, okay, we're going to do this it's like polling. We're going to do this representative sampling of the people. And then we're going to be like, hey, what do you think about, school choice vouchers, where instead of you taking the money and sending your kid to a public school and them getting that money from your tax dollars, you decide to send your kid to this like private religious school in your area, and we're going to send them the money. And then they try to understand what do the people actually think about that, That's what I thought a focus group was.
On a different topic, does your wife want to play Littoral Commander with us?
We could probably get a copy. What does the game cost? Do we know how much it costs?
It's like $90.
It's expensive, but it's not out of reach.
No, it's not out of reach. No, not at all.
It's not out of reach. Yeah. No, dude, board games are great.
Does she want to be PLAN or USMC? You know what? We won't. Well, we can decide later.
Is it really U.S. versus China? It really is. That's awesome.
What do you think it was going to be like?
Oh, I don't know. I thought it was going to be like a
Philippines versus
multiplayer game. I
Indonesia?
thought it was a multiplayer game. I don't know.
It is, but you would play as different task forces under either the PLA or the US.
Interesting.
Sounds like a lot of fun. We'll have to give it a try.
Yeah. I guess this is a good way to pivot into kind of our next two things. The next story, if you will, actually has to do with a very similar situation, a naval engagement. This one in the Middle East, the war in Iran. And for many of us that kind of follow this loosely or closely, there have been a U.S. aircraft carrier, the USS Lincoln, has been over there for what is purported to be the longest deployment of any carrier ever. Several hundred days without a port call. Allegedly conditions are bad on the boat. I don't know how they would know this. I mean, if these guys are posting on social media, this is completely insane to me. But they have finally, under some media pressure, some pressure from various people in leadership in the Congress, they're pulling the boat back home and they're sending in a replacement. And I have some thoughts on this, and I just wanted to let you open up the floor, Don.
I heard about this as well. I have some thoughts too. They're kind of all over the place because this is an interesting topic that touches on propaganda, and not just like one-sided propaganda, like a topic being spun in so many different directions to suit the narrative needs of whoever touches the topic, establishing a ground reality, which is hard to do. And then also just the history of naval logistics and the actual facts that I can discern, which is like, this is anomalous. And, if you strip the partisan narratives out of it, like there are pretty serious implications for
let's do it popcorn.
Sustainment of our naval
Stop
forces.
describing your comments and just say your comments. We'll do popcorn. Give your first one.
Okay. Yeah. So the way I first encountered this story were some screenshots of someone on the carrier, alleged screenshots of just really nasty looking food and some pretty horrendous bathrooms, and attached to like a short news story that said something like, sailors on this ship have been at sea for 9 months without a port call and are jumping off the ship and eating nasty food. And I was like, okay, that's pretty concerning. And then the next day I opened the news and it had been partisan spun in every direction. You have people coming out saying like, these guys are wimps, like what happened? Our force is so weak. And, you have people then saying like, how dare you do this? Like they sacrifice so much and you're just not appreciating our veterans. And I was just like, oh my, and then I logged off and I didn't pay attention.
Yeah. I
circled back about a week later and read a really thoughtful post by Sal Mercaglianos. I think that's how you say his name. Sal, by the way, is the number one journalist, I would say, for any maritime issue, both military and civilian. This guy, I think his account is called All About Shipping. He wrote a really good post about how, regardless of how you feel politically or what your political orientation is, this is very unusual. I think in his post he said that in World War II, like a ship, it was very rare for a ship to go over 30 days without a port call, period. 30 days is very different from 9 months, right? It's a lot, almost an order of magnitude. And he also said it pointed to logistics being, he's like, okay, let's take a step back. What is this actually telling us? It's telling us that resupplying these ships is very difficult. And one of the reasons he claimed that this is an issue is because our naval base in Bahrain got hit really hard. A lot of our bases in the Gulf are unusable and inaccessible. And so supplies need to be brought from Diego Garcia. Diego Garcia doesn't have enough refrigerator space or storage space, period, to keep the ship supplied. He said supply lines from our main supply bases to the Persian Gulf are even longer than the supply lines to the Pacific in World War II. So they're stretched very, very thin. In addition to that, we don't really have many U.S. flagged cargo ships. And so we don't have a reliable logistics fleet. It was a really refreshing post because it took a step back, kind of what I try to do, what I like to do. It took a step back and said, let's try to ignore the noise. What's the signal? What can we actually learn from this? There you go. Those are my hot takes. What do you think, Brederick?
Yeah, I mean, you've said a lot there, man. And I think there are a lot of different perspectives, like you said. I think they can range from legitimate concerns to, yeah, there being a bunch of punks. I'm with you on the analysis is like, what's actually going on here? Like, why has this ship been deployed so long? What are the factors that are actually at play? And I'm actually willing to step back and say that like it's actually impossible to determine. At least I hope it is, because if the Navy is actually disclosing enough information through either direct or side channel means that we're able to determine like exactly the conditions on these boats to like a pretty high degree, I think that's extremely troubling. That's I guess my like takeaway. Now, that being said, I do err a little bit more on the side of like, get your shit together. You're at war. Like, what do you think is going on here? I err on that side, I must admit. And I'll say why. It's like, you guys are the platform that is literally raining death from above down with these extremely advanced fighters. You are this like floating battle station that is just like ripping and roaring on the other end. And you guys are complaining about a clogged toilet.
Yeah,
I guess I kind of take that side a little bit more. I mean, I understand conditions are rough, but at the same time, this is where you're supposed to have command and leadership that is like, hey, this is us joining history. This is us like joining with our brethren from the World War II era, from all the way back to when the Marines were founded.
So let's talk about the World War II era, because I think that it's easy to say stuff like that. It's easy to be like, well, why are you being so weak? But I remember reading that post World War II, the Army psychiatrists did an analysis of PTSD, shell shock, whatever you wanted to call it. And they basically determined that they looked at almost like a burn rate of psychological casualties. And they're like, if you're in continuous combat operations, once you get to a certain point, and I think it was something like 3 weeks, like 20 something days of continuous combat operations, psychological casualties approach 100%.
Yeah.
And obviously this isn't like trench warfare, but it's if you wanted to apply like a coefficient score to the combat operations stressor, maybe it's like 0.1, right? Mm-hmm. So you're going to have this psychological burn rate. And if you can compare, like World War II was a serious war, and the Navy was still making sure in the Pacific that ships made it back to port every 30 days, right? Like you may have been fine at 6 months, but it's almost like water turning into steam. Like you can reach states of morale collapse, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not like these guys are unthreatened, right? They're well aware of the lack of missile interceptors, of the vulnerability of their ship. It's really hard to live on a boat. I haven't been at sea in one of these things, but I've toured some of these metal boxes. I think we underestimate the psychological stressors, and just saying like buck up, it really also underestimates the morale component. There's a lot of examples in history of militaries collapsing for morale purposes. Maybe one of the best is the Tsarist army in 1917. I mean, they just got their ass kicked and were like, why the hell are we doing this? And that ended it. There was no, I mean, they weren't like, they suffered a few decisive defeats, but it wasn't like the army was completely broken. It self-routed. I mean, that's a dynamic in every military conflict. And if you don't pay attention to that, you do it at your own risk, right? Everyone has a psychological breaking point, and this may be a real sign that point is being reached.
Yeah.
That's my take. Those are my thoughts.
I don't disagree with you. I'm not discounting anything that you're saying. That's not what I'm trying to say. But what I am saying is like, I think this is a signal though. I will admit to you, I do not believe that the conditions here, I will say this objectively on the record, I do not believe the conditions on this carrier are comparable to those that the sailors in World War II faced. I'm sorry. I do not believe you. I do not believe that narrative. My grandfather was deployed to the European theater for 5 continuous years. I know it was different. It wasn't on a boat. This is what I'm saying, but I'm just saying, like, he was gone from home for 5 years, including after the war efforts. It was a profound experience in his life. Like, it was this huge thing. Like, what is our Navy doing? Like, of all the stuff we've known, is it just like a failure of bureaucracy then? Like, okay, if these guys are so tough and this, that, and the other, like, I'm not trying to say they're not tough. Like, I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to say the conditions aren't tough. Well, I guess what I'm trying to say is the human spirit and the human endurance is real, and people can step up if you give them the space to step up. And I'm just saying that, like this could be a rallying moment where they're using this as a morale booster. Okay. And I'm just dubious that it's actually as bad as they're trying to say. I understand. I've been in bad living conditions. I've never been on a boat for 9 months, but
I'm on the complete opposite end of the spectrum here. I think that, and this is not a political viewpoint, right? I'm trying to adopt the point of view of, like, how do we succeed in military conflict, right? When you ask people to do stuff like go and fight a war, one of the most important elements is, why are we doing this? Like, why are we fighting? There is literature on World War II veterans compared to Vietnam veterans, for example, where the incidence rate, or almost like the burden of PTSD, was lightened on World War II veterans because it was so much easier to make a coherent narrative for themselves, like justifying why we are doing this. And
Totally.
this is a hard thing to measure, but just because it's hard to measure doesn't mean it's not a critical variable, right? Let's look at it this way. Your armed forces exist in 2 states: coherence and rout. And the dividing line is usually like a critical mass of morale collapse.
Sure.
So the morale is the dictating variable between whether your guys stand and fight or whether they collapse and are like, we're not going to do this.
Totally.
So what impacts morale? One of the biggest elements of morale is your why we fight, your why. If you look
100%.
at a country like Ukraine, that's a very, very easy pitch to make, right? The Russians are trying to come in and take over our country. That's an easy pitch, right?
Yeah.
For maybe even like the IRGC. Why are we fighting? Because these people bombed us. I've seen other indications, not just from the military, but from the U.S. public, that it is very hard to make this case, the why we fight case. And there's another YouTube account. I know I've mentioned so many YouTube accounts. They're all good. All the accounts I've mentioned are good. This guy, Preston Stewart, who I've mentioned before, is a I think artillery officer. He has great coverage of global conflicts. He said something really interesting in a video that I watched, which was, he said the thing that he is most upset about is that the political leadership of the United States has no coherent strategy. He said when he was in the military, his commanding officer, when they were in the field, would go to every person and just ask them, what is the mission? What is the mission? And you needed to say, without any hesitation, exactly why you were in that spot doing the thing you were doing at that moment. He said, every single person in the political leadership who made the decision to fight this war should be able to answer that question. And in fact, even to this day, they have not been able to get on the same page. You frequently get contradictory messages from different members of the cabinet, of the leadership. Yeah. And like on the same day, you'll have someone say, hey, negotiations are going great. And then someone else say, there are no negotiations. How do you think that impacts the people fighting? There's a war you may not believe in morally. Well, it doesn't matter. The military is your job. But then there's this incompetence aspect. Like, And then it goes on and on and on. You're like, oh, we are at war. We're not at war. We are at war. We're not at war. And you have to bear the brunt of that on a metal box with a ton of like smelly dudes with BO. Man, I think we are totally underestimating the variables and the magnitude of those variables that impact morale collapse. And the military will really pay for it. Like, mutiny is real.
Yeah.
Regardless of your political affiliation. And if you don't pay attention to it, it'll bite you.
I think you've actually made my point for me, because I think we're actually saying the same things. And the reason we're saying the same things is because we're just at different points on that position spectrum. And what I'm saying is, like, I had assumed when someone signed up for the military that they were signing up for this. And maybe they did not sign up for this. Maybe they signed up for free college. And so, maybe we need to have a sit down with ourselves and just be like, what are you doing? A bunch of these people signed up while Donald Trump was president.
Dude,
if you wanted to take orders from him, I understand, but
I think that this could have been, the morale situation could be on the opposite end of the spectrum, even if conditions were equally miserable, if this was like the first Gulf War, in those conditions where the narrative was way more, it was much easier to justify why you were doing what you were doing.
I think you've said what I'm trying to say better than I can. And it comes back to the purpose, and it comes back to that classic Nietzsche quote, right? He who has a why can bear almost any how. And I guess that's kind of what I'm trying to say, is like, I look at a guy like David Goggins, a crazy person who you're just like, okay, this is who I hope is in my armed services. I hope there's a guy who is so beyond what is reasonable. You look at like all these like kind of, I'll just use the term pop Navy SEALs. And these dudes are just like so buttoned up. I mean, I just have no doubt that these guys, like, this would be like a no factor situation for these guys on that boat, like no factor. And maybe that's unfair to put them as the standard bearer. And I'm not even trying to like rip on the kids on the boat. I'm really not. Like, I'm sure it's miserable. Please don't get me wrong. Like, I'm not trying to say they're in isolation, this is terrible, but taken as a broader picture, it's not a good look, man.
Yeah, I think it's, even if it's not a good look, it's like you can't will away the breaking points of forces in any condition.
You know what? Oh yeah, what?
I was going to say, just the same way that you can't just let, so these bases are starting to get hit by missiles pretty regularly because we're low on interceptors.
Right.
You can't just tell the people in those bases like toughen up. That is going to have a huge impact on their ability to sit there and have their barracks bombed by precision ballistic missiles.
Please don't get me wrong. I'm not asking anyone to just, go out and die for their country in some kind of suicide mission and all that. I guess we've said a lot on this. My heart goes out to these people in bad conditions across the world, regardless of your nationality or proclivity. But yeah, it's not great. I guess I was just struck by the fact of like, I'm like, man, I've just read so much history and it just seems like conditions can't possibly be that bad. But maybe with the morale condition, maybe with the advent of social media and all that. But I will say there is actually another factor that we have not talked about explicitly, which was in one of the articles I read explaining this, and that is the fact that we traditionally have had 15 carrier groups, and right now we only have 12 carrier groups. And that actually maintaining our global presence around the world is actually significantly reduced because of that. Mm-hmm. And we actually discussed this on the program a little bit ago. So I was thinking we could transition maybe into our responding to comments section as we're kind of wrapping up the show. But I want to give you the final word on this segment.
Yeah, my final word is just throughout history, all military forces are under some kind of pressure. Like I said, there's a pressure coefficient that can vary quite a bit depending on what you're doing. But as a math guy, if you multiply the coefficient by amount of time, you can end up with the same number, right? So if you have a pressure of 0.1, but 10 times, and then a coefficient of 1, but your time elapse is 10 times longer than the other one, you can end up at the same breaking point, just at different points in time. And that, I think, is what people need to keep in mind. But pivoting to your topic about the reduction in carrier groups.
I will pivot to that briefly, because I just want to step back really quickly and just say, and I think you and I are both in 100% agreement on this. We want the U.S. Armed Forces to be successful, and we want them to be a formidable fighting force that is able to do what it needs to do for our country and I'll just use the word American empire. And so if it means we need to do if we need to do a phase shift, if we need to have a different philosophy because people aren't the way they used to be, hey man, we need to adjust the way we fight wars, to your point. And if that means having the port call situation figured out in a different way because the soldiers are going to mutiny, or the sailors rather, like this is an obvious, like it's a problem. Get it fixed. No excuses. Trump administration. No excuses.
Take care of it, please.
No excuses, Navy brass. Get on it. Figure out why you can't get these guys what they need. But I will say this. We discussed a development, I think it was last week. It might have been 2 weeks ago. But basically it was this idea of delivering new war hardware, let's say. And we got a very nice comment from someone. And I'm assuming it was directed at me because I asked for the hate mail. And it was on a segment where basically what we said was there was a new supercarrier, the Gerald R. Ford class, and it was not delivered in time, and it was not yet still operational. And our comment wrote this: the Ford was commissioned in 2017, NumNuts, and we're sitting here in 2026, so I get it. So the Ford was commissioned in 2017, NumNuts. That's 9 years ago. The second in the class, the Kennedy, will be commissioned next year. Okay. So I want to thank CGirl111 for that lovely comment, and I'm gonna remove it from the screen here. And I guess what I'm gonna say is this: is CGirl111 is correct. If you look at the way contractual things are set up, it was commissioned exactly as this commentator has said, and you're right. I guess I am a numbnuts.
That's really wholesome insult, by the way.
Yeah.
I liked it.
It's a good one. But if I can comment a little further on that, because this is the Don and Brederick program, we like to kind of get at a little bit more than just did they check the box, okay? And I'm actually going to fast forward, and I'm going to ask you this question. Is that super carrier on August 22, 2026, operating at the capacity that was paid for and promised by the U.S. people? And the answer is no. The answer is no. All the systems have not been delivered. I don't care if it's gone on deployments. It has not been delivered. That is the point, the spirit of my comment. And that is where you're going to start to end up with, I hope you watch the show. I hope you continue to watch the show. But here, we're interested in not legal checkbox definitions that, whatever it is. Oh, it technically got delivered. Yeah, it did. It technically got delivered. Okay? We're interested in understanding the actual implications and the actual results of real progress and real value. Okay? Like the comment we just had, the discussion we just had. Like, okay, is the morale this? Is it that? It's like, I don't know. It turns out it's pretty complicated, and we're interested in just trying to understand different perspectives with the ultimate goal of reality. And that boat is not delivered in the way that it was promised or paid for.
Was the Gerald Ford the one that had the laundry fire?
I don't know.
I know one of them had like a catastrophic laundry fire that took it out of action. There was conspiracy theories that it was actually hit by Iranian drones or missiles, and the laundry fire was a cover up. But honestly, the laundry machine catching fire and causing basically knocking it out of action is almost a more disturbing scenario than it getting hit by a missile fire. I don't know if that was the Gerald R. Ford or not. Maybe CGirl111 can tell us. I hope C stands for carrier. CGirl,
I hope so too.
Jets on the Ford. That's kind of sick.
she's what they call a bad bitch. She drops napalm, man. She's like ready to roll. As Whatever. I have a buddy who was a friend of the program, Dr. Strangelove. I remember he was telling me this story of when he was in Afghanistan and they were calling in this airstrike and it was a female pilot and it was the first female voice he had heard in like months. And he was just like, ooh, breaker 4-4. All right, you dropped that bomb. Like, whatever. It's a side joke.
Yeah.
But no, I think I would agree with you. It's actually more disturbing than it actually being a hit from another group. Now, I guess what I would just say, and it's not meaning to be this whole thing. I hope Seagirl 111 listens to the program. We like to have all voices here. I'm not sure how serious they are with this comment, because any serious look at this thing, if you're defending the delivery of this boat, I'm not sure you and I are on the same team. Just because it's like, there's not a lot of redemption here unless you are, I believe it's HII, the giant naval contractor that builds these boats. I don't think you could say that this was a success. A number of years ago, I watched a very thoughtfully put together video and read a little bit of research on this. And my understanding is they just tried to do too many new technologies in one spin. And anyone who has built complex systems knows you just can't change too many variables. You're going to have too many interactions effects, and it's just going to make it almost impossible to get done. And I think that's what we've seen.
I really hope Seagirl flies F-18s on the Ford, and then comes back and roasts you even harder in the comments. Because I'll drop in the comments and like give Seagirl a digital high five, because that's great. I love it. I love the spiciness. Send Brederick more hate mail.
Please do. I mean, I'm here for it. I mean, I want to be very clear. The comment is technically correct. They're correct. And I was wrong.
NumNuts is good.
It's
an
an old
high
school.
five for NumNuts.
Yeah, she also might be 14, I guess. So that would be another.
You never know. Yeah, you never know who has strong opinions on carriers on the internet. It's a big distribution, from what I understand.
Yeah. Well, this has been a long episode. I don't really have too much more to say other than please continue to send your comments. It's the only way we get feedback from you guys is if you comment. So comment on the videos, back channel us if you know us personally. But we're always interested in hearing feedback on topics, on how deep we go, even our banter. I'm not
and
willing
even
to
what topics you want to hear us address. You got a pet topic? Let us know. We'll dive into it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And if we don't know about it, we'll figure it out and develop some opinions, because that's what we do. We are articulate, educated individuals that are interested in moving life forward for everybody. So with that, I am Brederick McDonald, and I'm with my host,
Don DeGare. Until next time.
Yep. Please send me the hate mail, Don the love mail. We'll talk to you later.